Anybody in the room use any of these as their ISP? Yeah? So your big brother's going to be watching you from now on. These guys are going to have an obligation to watch what you are downloading. So you heard it here first, I'm afraid. Yeah. There's, I don't know if this link up here will work. This appeared in the Daily Telegraph yesterday, and it is those guys named there, the big internet service providers, are understandably up in arms. They're saying, hey, how come it applies to us and not the smaller guys? Well, the answer is because you're the big guys. But they claim it's going to create an unfair market in which people will switch to using smaller internet providers for fear that their details are being recorded and made available to third parties if they stick with some of the large providers. It's a long time to close. Never mind, let's just leave that. You can download that clip yourself and take a look at what they are saying. As it was in the Daily Telegraph, I think, only yesterday. This is the process. The actual letter that has to come out to you is described in these regulations. There is particular wording laid down, and some of this is quite threatening stuff. I mean, I wouldn't like to think that my grandmother got a letter like this through the post. It would scare the living daylights out of her. Please do not ignore this letter. You may be added to a copyright infringers list and risk legal action being taken against you. Blah, blah, blah. And then the second and third letter as well. And finally it says, you may be included on the copyright infringers list. They will find out your identity. So these letters will shortly start falling through people's letterboxes. And there will understandably be an outcry over this. Jim Killock, the executive director of the Open Rights Group, says letters being sent out could cause a lot of worry and fear. People will may feel they're under surveillance. I expect they will, because they are under surveillance. So yes, they'll quickly work that one out, I think. Yeah. At the present time, letters are sent out by lawyers who practice in this field, threatening people for infringing copyright. We've all read cases in the paper of people being wrongly accused and having to clear their name. There is a feeling that this may become more of a trend. It's a worry for some people. The Ofcom Code of Practice, as I say, is here, and there's a link down the bottom of this page. If anybody wants to download it, go there. And it's open for comments until the end of July. And so if you read through that, there's a summary and then there's the detail. If you want to comment on it, there's an address to which you can write objecting or making comments or suggestions and so on. But the consultation period is very, very tight. It's only through until the end of July. At which point the code will become enforceable, because the way the Act works is it says Ofcom must prepare a code, prepares a code, that code then applies. It's really a form of delegated legislation. We mentioned it's going to apply to these 7 large ISPs, all of whom have initially over 400,000 subscribers, but it will apply to smaller ISPs later on. Forgive me, I'm croaking, I must have a glass of water. Bear with me. Okay, yes, keep going. Keep going, Sally. Here we are. Here's the timetable. Again, it's on the Ofcom website, setting out the process by which the code and certain other obligations will be enforced, will be brought into force. One of the issues this raises, of course, is who pays for all of this. And there is a general feeling that internet service providers will be adding to their rates, possibly as much as £5 a month or more than that, to actually enable them to recover the extra costs that they will incur by policing all of this. And if someone is challenged, if someone gets a letter and has to challenge a threatened disconnection, it's obviously going to cost them time and money as well. And there's a risk that people might not recover all of their costs in doing so. There are 6 easy steps to disconnection. Yes, let's hope we don't go down this path. The rights holder, the company who own the copyright, find the identity of the Internet Protocol address. They send the offending IP address to the relevant Internet service provider. That's then matched up against the IP address and the broadband connection. The warning letter goes out. If it continues to offend, i.e. 3 strikes over a 12-month period, then the ISP has to impose a penalty The penalty is left to be decided at the moment, and it can mean closing down the line altogether or restricting the bandwidth or doing other things to it. If you think you've been wrongly accused, you have to initiate the process to stop that happening to you. And so you might find the ISP says, sorry, we've sent you 3 letters, and your son or daughter or the son's friend or whatever has been abusing your internet connection, and the whole family's or the whole location's connection is cut off or made less effective because of that. So there will be a series of problems there, I'm sure. Sally. The reaction to this has been quite vociferous in some quarters. The arguments are that it targets the vulnerable. People who don't know a lot about the internet may find that they are being targeted. As I say, it's confusing when you go to many websites as to what you can and cannot download anyway, so there's a risk that people simply get confused. It doesn't rest very easy with data protection legislation. We all increasingly recognise that we have a right to a private life and privacy. This means that your details, without your permission, can be disclosed to a third party, you know, Warner Brothers or somebody like that. We'll find out who you are and they can write to you. It's been rushed through Parliament, as I say, because it was not debated, it didn't go through the committee stage, it was drafted in a fairly rough and ready state. And more importantly, perhaps, the final failing with it all is it's very easy for pirates to actually circumvent this, because the internet rarely stays the same for very long. And I have a slide later on which will take us into that. There's been some hostile response from TalkTalk, which I think is the UK's second largest internet provider. They are leading the charge against the legislation. They call it a bureaucratic dog's breakfast. And they've actually said that they don't intend to comply. They're going to sort of do a Gandhi, as it were, you know, civil disobedience. They say, we're just not going to comply. I doubt very much they will stick to that, because they themselves will find that they are in breach of their legal obligation. But they are very, very vociferous. If you go to their website and have a look, there's a lot of material there. They argue against it. On the other hand, the creative industries, the BPI, British Phonographic Institute, industry, they are totally behind it. And they argue that some telecom giants, TalkTalk, Virgin, etc., have an effect of making money out of somebody else's material, musicians and so on and so forth. So there's a bit of a battle going on between those two interest groups. Who is 100% confident, who in this room, that their internet connection, their wireless connection is secure? Hold your hand if you're totally confident it's secure. You have 3 people, I think, who feel totally confident about that. There was some work done, and I think we have some slides here shortly. Maybe can we just go on to those where we'll go back to this in a moment. Here we are. TalkTalk did a survey in the Ealing area of West London. They sat in one house in the middle here and sniffed out how many Wi-Fi access points there were in a certain radius. They found that there were 1,083 that they could actually see. They could detect those fairly simply. Only 30 of those 1,083 were secured using something called WPA2, which is the highly secure. And the most secure, there were 30 that were really secure. Next slide, Sally. And there were over 440 out of that 1,000, about 40% roughly, that a child aged 5 could hack into quite easily. So they were sort of not in any way secure at all. So let's go back to where we were, Sally, if we page back up a little way. The big risk, one of the big risks is, down a couple of slides I think, is that people will, the vulnerable will find that their Wi-Fi systems are hacked into and used to download material, that address goes onto the infringers list, and you get your internet connection, get it out, John, cut off as a result of something somebody else has done. There's a huge